Hey, what's up, YouTube? It's Mike. I just want to make a quick little informational thingy. I just started this tuning video for the VE tune as I'm retuning based on my crummy, debatable, not reliable injector flow rates, and I'm trying to make those injectors work rather than just swap them out because I can't be sure if that's 100% the problem or not. So I don't want to drop, three, four, $500 on a good set of injectors. And still be in the same boat. So I'm going to try and make these work. But anyway, I never started this VE video and the tuning videos with the pretense of it being, a how-to. I mean, there's a ton of those videos out there by some really good support, really good providers and content generators, and like Goat Rope and Matt Sanford, and Chopper Doc's been fantastic, and HP Academy, and the HP Tuners Forum is fantastic, and there's some really good information and how-tos on it. So I never really started that under the idea of it being a how-to tune your Gen 3 LS, but it's kind of evolving into that. So the VE tune is done, the video's edited down. I'm going to put this little promo in ahead of time, and it's like an hour and a half of me going back and forth between tables and rambling on about how stuff works and how I think stuff works. And I'm sure it's not 100%. So I don't know if I would use it directly as a how-to video, but I'm sure there's some stuff in there that people would find useful. And it's, if nothing else, it's more like a ride-along. The next couple of videos, the mass airflow tune and the idle tune and all that, I'm going to try and be a little more focused on being more informational straight off as opposed to just a ride-along. So if you like the VE video, that's great. Like and subscribe. We'll try and keep this channel going as long as I can. It's a heck of a lot of fun. I don't expect it to be monetized or make any money off it. It's just me having fun doing it. So thanks for coming along and coming along for the ride. And like I said, check out the VE2. Check out this video if you like it. Even if you're scrolling on your phone and let it run in the background, I'm sure there's going to be little bits and pieces that you'll find useful, at the very least entertaining. And check out the next couple of videos, and I'll try to be a little more focused and do a little better job at it. But thanks for coming along for the ride. Like and subscribe, please. I'll talk to you soon. Bye. Oh yeah, and we got some more stuff coming up. You notice I'm starting to accumulate parts. The AC compressor died, so I've got a new. It's a Sandin 7 HD15, I think is the nomenclature. I had an SD508 on it, and it just couldn't take the RPM, and it crapped out. And so I've got a new 7 series sanding going to go in. What else we got? AC stuff, some minor bric-a-brac. So we'll have some more videos coming soon. So I appreciate you checking me out and being a loyal follower, whatever that means these days. But yeah, go ahead. Hey, like and subscribe. It helps the channel out. Oh, here comes my prodigy. Take care. Bye. And what happened with this is, I mean, the car as it sat, it ran great, drive great, the trans tune is good. I mean, I was generally pretty happy with it. But I had a weird anomaly on my VE table, and what I noticed in going back and digging into it was that power enrichment didn't come in until way late on the original tune, and I hadn't changed power enrichment. It originally didn't come in until like 95% throttle. And when I looked at the VE table, the VE table, the top end at high load, 100% throttle position or 95% throttle position, was reading super high on volumetric efficiently, like 170%, which is way high, way too high. This isn't supercharged or turbo, it's normally aspirated. It shouldn't be that high. So what that told me was that I didn't have enough fuel coming in, because it calculates VE based off the fuel that it thinks it's getting through the injector. So that made me look at the injectors and the injector flow rate and injector data being suspicious, because that'll do two things. It uses the injector flow rate to calculate how much fuel is actually flowing into each cylinder or into the motor, and then calculates the efficiency, because it knows what the displacement is. You plug that in, that's just straight math. And when you get to the timing end, it uses the VE table and calculated cylinder air mass, and that puts you up on the timing table depending on engine load, because it's based off engine load and cylinder air mass. So it was throwing me way at the top of the timing table, and I was running out of room up there. I mean, I don't think I'd actually hit the wall at the top of the table, but it was running at like, way high cylinder mass, more than it should. Again, because it's not supercharged or normally aspirated or turboed. If it was forced induction, I would have to scale the table up and use a 2-bar or 3-bar map sensor and have it function within those parameters. But for a normally aspirated motor, that table should have more than enough headroom on it. So I went back in and looking at the injector flow rates, and I'm not getting exactly 58 psi up at the fuel rail because this is not a referenced fuel system. It's got a C5 Corvette regulator back at the tank, and then the lines run up. And so instead of getting an exact 58 psi at the fuel rail, I'm actually getting around 56 because there's a little bit of pressure drop between the regulator and the fuel rail. So that should decrease the injector flow rate. And then I'm generally suspicious that these injectors might be flowing a little less than they were advertised. So I went in to put in a modified injector flow rate and tweak the rest of the injector tables to compensate for a lower flow. And what I'm going to have to do now is go back through and retune the VE table and the MAF and the timing again. So I thought I'd bring you in the loop on this. And let me show you what I had as an anomaly, or 2 anomalies really, on the VE table. And I'm going to flip you around here. So you can see that not only did I have this crazy dip and ridge down low, but also when you look up at max power, at max load, I'm up in the 170s. Because this is based off map pressure. So when I'm at 0 intake vacuum, because the throttle's wide open, it's going to sit up at this end of the table. And so what I want to do is I just changed the tune around. And I'll pull up my new tune for you. Let me show you the old one first. Where is power enrichment? Coming in at 55 kpi map, which is fine. Oh, and actually you want to go see this on a 90% throttle before power enrichment was activated. And actually you want to run off the cold throttle enrichment table, which is the same. So this is the factory table from the truck. I had to get to 90% throttle before I was tipping in any, before I was tipping in power enrichment at any RPM. So that means essentially I was running no power enrichment until I pegged the throttle. And I had EQ set up, which basically is your mixture based off EQ. 1.48 up to 1.3, which will richen it up as the RPM comes up. My stoich is set to 14.2 because I occasionally run alcohol, ethanol-aided fuels here in Florida. You get it, and I don't want to worry about having to swing back and forth. Like I run into 14.7, but then if I run alcohol-based fuels, it'll kind of run lean. And so what I did for the new tune is basically you go in and the MAF is still live here, but it's not going to look at it because I've disabled it. And the way you do that is you go into engine diagram, master airflow sensor, and have it fail at 100 Hertz. So basically, as soon as the motor starts, it's going to fail the master airflow sensor. And what you need to do in addition to that is go in, and these top 3 DTCs, 101, 2, and 3, all need to fail on first error. So as soon as you start it fails the MAF, and it immediately reverts back to the VE table only. If you don't have this on first error, you'd have to cycle it twice. You have to fail twice, and it just saves a lot of time to have these set and go to fail on first error. I also turned off SES enable, that way it doesn't turn the check engine light on. So if I have a different problem going on while I'm on a run, it'll still turn the check engine light on. I'm not going to have it looking at me the whole time. Going in their fuel, I turned off deceleration fuel cutoff. It doesn't enable to 284 degrees, so that'll never turn on. Power enrichment is still on. Long-term fuel trims are shut off. Notice in enable, minimum ECT is 284, so they're not going to. Long-term trims are shut off. Short-term trims are disabled. Short-term fuel trim in open loop is disabled. What else we got? If you have catalyst protection on, you need to make sure that's disabled. I'm not running CAT, so that stays disabled on mine. So basically, if you turn off you cut off your deceleration fuel cutoff, you shut off the oxygen sensors, leave it in an open loop, and you disable the math, it'll run straight VE. And then when you go in and do a test run, do a log with it running off just the straight VE table, you can monitor the wideband variance and look and see where it's rich or lean, and then make your adjustments from there. So I've dropped the IFR and the injector flow rate tables down, and as you can see, I'm now way rich, which is exactly what I wanted. And this is right on that big valley, that big peak rather, on my VE table. And then of course it climbs up a little bit. Now I didn't run too high of an RPM because I didn't know if I was getting into any knock down the road, and I want to try and take this in stages. All right, so I went ahead and moved inside because it's just ungodly hot outside already. So basically we're looking at this is the log that's reading exactly like the VA table does. It's set up for map versus engine RPM at the exact same gradients and axis, columns and rows as the VE table itself. So we can take this data and we can transfer this directly into the VE table to affect it in the direction we want. Since this is the first run with the new data in there, I'm just going to bulk all this in at the same time, and then I'll have to smooth the VA table out a bit because I didn't get a ton of coverage, but I'm pretty good up to 3,000 RPM. So these tails are going to show up, and there'll be big dips where it was too rich, so it leaned it out. So I'll have to go in and smooth some of the stuff over, and then obviously smooth these out to get up higher into the table margins. And I'm not going to go into great detail about how to set up this histogram. There's enough YouTube videos on that already. Basically, you need to set it up like so. So you'll see I've got engine RPM across the column axis, and then manifold absolute pressure on the row axis with the same gradients, the same steps as the VE table. And you can copy these directly in. If you go to the VE table, airflow, you can go right up here and copy labels. And it'll copy the exact same labels and same column data. So when you're looking at the log in the scanner, in VCM Scanner, you'll have stuff that relates directly to the VE table itself. You're not worried about doing any math or compensating for that. So and then of course I've got the filter set up to filter out any transient. So that way, if I'm on and off the throttle and changing throttle positions, what you want is a nice stable run when you go out for a log, because you want it to be in each RPM and in each cell as long as possible to fill the data up. And if you click on counts, it'll show you how many times it pulled data. Oops, let me close that. So you can see I had 2,600 hits in that cell, 4,400. And as you get to the ends, as you're coming up and down in throttles, it'll thin out towards the ends. Like that only has 1, that only has 2. And so what you'll do is come up here, and click on the corner, which will highlight the entire chart. Right click, copy, and then go to your VE table, and what you can do here is right click, paste special, and I'm going to multiply as a straight percentage. Another piece of advice is, as you start fine tuning and getting it close to 0 or 0.1 lean or 0.2 lean, you get it within 1% either way, consider the cell's done. Once you start getting that close, you're getting down to 2 and 3% variance, then you'll want to multiply by half. That way you're putting small changes in. Because there's going to be barometric pressure changes and weather changes, humidity is going to be coming up and down. That's going to affect your reading. So you're never going to get the VE table to read, your VE, your mixture variance, the EQ variance, to read zeros. I mean, it's always going to be some variance, so that's fine. So once you get down like 2 or 3% error in the VCM scanner log, that's pretty much, you can call that done. So you'll want to move in smaller steps as you get closer to 2 and 3% variance in those things. So you do multiply by half, and that would take the percentages. That would take the percentages from the VE log and only multiply half of that change to the table. So you'd have much more gradual changes, and you're less likely to have big swings up and down as as your environmental conditions are changing, engine conditions are changing. So I'm going to multiply this by straight percent because I know I've got to move a lot because I just changed all the injector data, and you'll see what it does to the table when I do that. Actually, what I'm going to do first is blow this out so you can see the graph change. So there was the table we started with the 3D graph, and I'm going to paste special, multiply by percent. Bam. And you can see how much it dropped down that big peak and actually started to raise up some of that valley. Because what I've done in this, I probably should have showed you while I had that tune up. I'm going to close this for now. I'm going to go back into the VE table in a second. But with power enrichment, I modified that to come in at 35%. 35% throttle. So it's as I'm getting into throttle, I'm getting heavy into throttle, it's starting to go into power enrichment. It just enables power enrichment to function. It doesn't mean it's going to enrich it up, because that's still going to be based off your EQ ratio at a preset RPM. Oh, and the way I came up with this 1.15 on EQ ratio basically is your stoichiometric, your stoich, which is 14.2 I've set on this motor, divided by your desired power enrichment mixture ratio, which was 12.5. So 14.2 divided by 12.5 gets me 1.15, and that's basically what I want to see is 12.5 across the board. So this EQ ratio of 1.15 relates directly, because this is a modifier on the base EQ ratio. So this doesn't mean the EQ ratio is going to be 1.15. It means it's going to modify the EQ ratio or the stoich ratio as set. So when I get into power enrichment above 35% throttle, it's going to kick in and go up to 12.5 to 1 instead of 14.7.1 or 14.2.1. And so that number may be different for you depending on where you have your stoich set on your fuel, whether you're running alcohol or not. If you're running, a flex fuel where you can do alcohol sensing, then some of that's easier because that'll do the math for you. But I don't know whether I'm going to be able to get always ethanolated fuel. So I set it at 4.2, which kind of gets me in the middle between 95%, 90% and none. And all right, so now we'll go back into the VE table, and we've got all this chunky mess here. So what you don't want are these big transitions, like a big hole here and a big jump here and a big hole here and a jump here. If you look on the chart where the pointer's moving, you can see what's happened. Here's where I just measured it on a log, and then here's data that hasn't been touched yet. So obviously that needs to come down. So what I'm going to do is take a look and see what my percentage was like up there. 10, 15% at 1200. Let's say 12% at 800. So I want to take 12% off at 800. So I'm going to multiply this group of boxes by 0.88, which will be a 12% deduction. And if you saw me key that in, let me go backwards. I think I dipped the camera down. So I'm going to go up here. I highlighted the 4 cells that I want to move, and I know I need to take about 12% off of that. So I'm going to go 0.88, which will take 12% off what it's starting from, and multiply. Boop, and that will drop that down. And you can see what it did here. It flattened that out. If I reverse it, I'll give you another graphic. Here's what it looked like to start with. And then multiplying it by 0.88, dropped it down in line with the one before it. And the same thing with the cells before that in the next range, 1200 RPM. It looks like we were like 15% rich. Or we were 15 or 16% rich. I'll take 15% off of that. So of course that's going to be 0.85. We'll go over here. And again, we'll see the chart drop down once I multiply it. Bam. So now we're starting to see more normal numbers down here. It's coming way down. And as I go back and do runs, some of this will come back up, some of it will go back down. 1600 RPM was down by about, let's say 8.5. Let's say 8%. Back this off so I can see over it. 2000, about the same. So I'm just taking 8% off of these guys. And those are, that top bar, I don't think I ever hit 105 and rarely hit the 100 bar. So those were kind of speculative. You look at the trend as it's coming up, and then I'd filter it in the next two. I'd carry it up and interpolate it up. And what do we got? 24 is about 5%. 28 and up look to be about 3% is probably a good place to be. So 5% and 3%. So you see it's starting to drop that down now. I'm going to fill these guys in. Where else were we lacking? And it looks like I'll probably take 5% off. I'm probably going to pull 5% off the 400 RPM table and then down below here as well. Most of this is way rich up top. This would be in deceleration fuel cutoff range, so that would be kicking in and leaning that out anyway, but the less it has to do, the leaner it's going to run, the better fuel efficiency I'll get on decel. So obviously 2800 RPM. And is there a bunch of counts? Yeah, there's a bunch of counts in that area. So we're going to go ahead and smooth those down. And so I just went through manually and filled in all these boxes here. And this one, now I need to fill these in right here. Again, we're looking at about 3% at 3600 in that gap, and about let's say 4%. Let's say 5% at 3200. So 5% of 32 and 4% of 36. I'm going to leave these fat for the time being. I may bulk drop some of the higher end stuff down because I think that's all going to come down as well. Let's go probably 97%, I think, because I'm at least 3% rich through here. So I'm going to fan that out. And then I'll watch to make sure I'm not, as I'm getting up to higher RPMs on my subsequent runs, I'm going to make sure I'm not running excessively lean, or I'll have to go back in and manually bump this stuff up. And I'm just doing this particular column because it's easier to bulk edit them all. And I'm going to drop that one down. And you can see it's starting to fan down now. I'm going to take 3% off the whole rest of the chart. So we're getting down into the 160s now. So we're moving in the right direction. Ultimately, I may have to still go back in and adjust the ejector flow rates down. If anybody has any ideas on why I've got that weird valley still, a bit of it, in here, and again, this is still got to get cleaned up, but it's still a pretty pronounced valley in there, and reading way too high on VE, feel free to fire off a comment and let me know what you think. And I think it's injector flow rate. I don't think it's not starving for fuel. And if you look at my, one thing I did always capture is injector duty cycle. And if you look, I'm getting nowhere near max duty cycle yet. I'm still only part throttle, but even at wide open, the most I had ever hit, I think, was 75 or 80% duty cycle, up towards 5,600, 6,000 RPM. It still had plenty of overhead as far as fuel flow wise, so it wasn't leaning out. And again, this isn't accurate, and I could be using smoothing for a lot of this, and I'll go through and smooth it in a minute. But right now, with the change in injector flow rate, I know it's going to be way off, and it's going to need several more cleanup runs, several more runs to get accurate data in here. So I'm just kind of running through this. So now we're back over here. We still have these big ridges on the top. So I definitely want to smooth these down, and we're looking at 1600 RPM up at the end. to 24, probably up to 3,500 RPM. And I'm just going to smooth these. So I highlighted this section, which is going to highlight this whole area that got real data in that's kind of choppy. And I'm going to smooth this sucker out. And watch what it does to the graph. So it flattens out those big transitions, because that's what you don't want, is those little spikes that are back and forth in there. You want it to be nice and smooth. That way, as you're on and off the throttle, you're driving, you know, as you sit with steady throttle position, what's going to happen is as the car is speeding up and the RPM's going up, it's going to start creeping up through these cells. And what you don't want is for there to be a big transition where it goes from, you know, 87 up to, you know, 97 would be a big jump right there. As you can see, it's only one, and then it jumps by 3, it goes by 3, it goes by 5, goes by 2. As we're getting up into the power band, it'll start to flatten out. Like here, my peak fueling right now is somewhere around 4,800 RPM as it's getting up on the cam. And then once it gets up into peak efficiency, and then it kind of flat lines off, and then I have the mixture dropping off towards the end. Because I'll never spin this motor to 7 grand with a stock top end on it. You know, the most I'd spin it was like 6,500. So up to 6,500, it's still growing, and then my rev limiter would kick in and stop the ignition system, would shut it down. So I'm going to take this out. I'm going to load this back in, dump it into the ECM, take it out for another run, and rinse and repeat. And I'll touch back with you once I get it back out. Actually, I'll probably going to pause this right now, and then I'll come back in, and you can watch me upload it into the ECM, and then we'll go out for a run and see what my next log looks like. Alright, so we're back out in the garage, aka the hot box. Something I neglected to mention before is that anytime I'm doing tuning runs, I always keep a chart, a histogram run up for spark retard to see if I'm getting any retard while I'm doing a tuning log. And what I did get a little bit of retard right in there, 0.8 up to 1 degree of retard. That really isn't much of anything. I'm not concerned with that right now. If I start seeing 2 or 3 degrees, then obviously I would go in and back off the timing table right there. There's lots of reasons that could appear. It could be false knock, could be a little bit of a lean spot in the tune. But as I'm going through the tune, you'll see it. That will move around. And as I get in higher RPM, I may see more, because what's going to happen as I start bringing cylinder air mass back down to where it should be, my timing table, as cylinder air mass starts to come down, I mean, I was hitting up at 108, 116, 112, and that's way too high. As I start to come down in the timing table, because it's calculating less cylinder efficiency, I'm going to start running up in timing. So it's not going to be. It wouldn't be surprising to see me start hitting a little bit of spark knock, and I'll have to go back and retouch the table. But so I've got this VE table modified, and we're going to make sure we save this guy. And I'm going to make this new tune. I can't see what I'm doing because I got the camera up. New tune 1, so that'll be the first mod of the new tune. And I'll reach down. Now I'm just going to reach down and turn the key on. My USB is hooked up already. And I'm going to load the tune into the ECM. It takes about 20 seconds to actually run the tune in, then we'll go through a cleanup, and we'll see. Little old school jet wheel toe playing on the car radio, appropriate for an 82. That's it. We're good to go. I can minimize this guy. And I'm going to get in it, start it up, and then I'll hit log and take it out for another run, and we'll see what it looks like when I get back. Alright, so I'm back. It's about noon here, 12:30 in Florida, and it's getting too darn hot out. So that's probably the last tuning run for today. That was a good run, though. I pulled up the log from the initial tuning run when I set it up with the new injector flow rate and all that stuff, and as you can see, we're way rich in most places. And I adjusted that, and I'm going to go pull up the tune from after the next tuning run. So I had made some adjustments in the last little piece of video. And here's what it looks like now. And as you can see, it's much closer. We're actually a little bit lean in here. We're still a little bit rich in here. But for the most part, we're getting way closer. As long as you're down between, 1, 2, 3% variance, you're fine, because your trims are going to take care of that, and you'll never get it perfect. So don't get OCD over it. This run, since I had no knock retard going on during the last run, I spun it up a little more. I got a 5,200 RPM. I'm well into the point where MAF really is going to be taking over control of fueling, so I'm not overly concerned about redline in this thing during the VE tune, because it's I need the MAF. The mass airflow is going to be a lot more reliable at higher RPM. When you're climbing at higher RPM, you're jumping those cells pretty quickly, and so MAF gives you a little more stable at high RPM. Low RPM, below 4 grand, it's way more dependent on the VE table and how the dynamic air filters in mass airflow from 4,000 RPM up. So below 4,000 RPM, you're pretty much running on the VE table. And this is all going to be part throttle, easy throttle around town, and where you're really going to feel these little transition changes. Like here, you wouldn't even feel this. From 1% lean to 0.3% rich, you're never going to feel that driving. So these are close enough, but you get big jumps like that, 5 or 6% on those two cells, that you'd probably feel. Where this is in the table tells me that this really is going to be deceleration or coast down. I do have this filtered out, so the only time it'll set any of the cell data is going to be when I'm at least 2% throttle. So I'm not bringing in any data. I shouldn't be bringing any data under closed throttle decel. But the idea is to filter out as much noise as I can and just get good usable data. So this obviously still needs to come down some. We're looking pretty good up here. These could maybe come a little bit. So this is definitely going to be a candidate for doing the 0.5% apply. So I'm going to grab the whole table, copy. Oh, and by the way, when you grab this whole table, you want to make sure the sliders are all the way to the left and the top, so that you're starting at 400 RPM and 15. For some reason, what we've seen is that if you're like this and you click on the whole table, it may only grab the section you're looking at. But if you're all the way in the corner, you're okay. So let me make sure I copied that, because I've been yapping and I forgot. So we're going to copy that, and we'll take it over to VCM editor, and then I'm going to highlight the whole table and paste special times 0.5%. Now this will only change it by half of the variance. So it allows you to creep up on it without introducing any potential bad data and big spikes in it. So you'll see a change, but not as much as it did on the last time. So we swung a little bit, brought some more of this peak down, starting to bring down some of this. This 400 RPM should definitely come down some. I don't think I hit any of those cells on the run. Now, see, 400 RPM is still empty, so I'll fade this down a little bit. These came down about, 2-3%. So on that last copy over at 0.5%, like this 4.2, it's not going to take out 4.2%. It's going to take out 2.1, half of that percentage value. And the same here, 4.89 lean, it's actually going to add back 2.45. So you're kind of meet in the middle, and it lets you kind of flatten out those peaks and valleys and not introduce any real bad data. And of course, now I'm going to go in and I'll go in and smooth this over to take care of these big jumps. Like, it didn't affect anything in here, but I had a 10% rich there, or a 10% lean. So it was adding fuel there. So we're going to have a big of a gap here. So I'll go fill some of these in with smoothing. And there's that big void where it didn't change any of the cells. So I'll smooth these out. And then it looks like I can definitely start bringing down this outer lip, because now I'm as you can see, it maxes at 100. So that's, wide open throttle. And so I can start smoothing some of these down. I'll probably bring down this row to about within, 2% of the 100 row. Just, because what it'll do is if you're not, 5,600 RPM and 6,000 RPM, when you're at 58, it's going to average these two cells together. So if I get any variances in a map and it's reading, 102, it's going to start pulling from this column, or this row rather. So I don't want to have these zeroed out or anything. I want them to be at least close. So, and then any general trends I see, I can go back in and fudge a little bit in just to get me back where I want to be. Like here, it's actually starting to lean out. It looks like in higher RPM,
And not by much, but a bit. So, you know, right now when I do the copy half, it's going to add 3% there and add 2.9% there and 2.3, 2.35. So I may go back in and add another, you know, 2% in this area just to get me up, because I don't want it to lean out. It's also worth noting that when I did this run, I had no spark retard at all. So I had no knock anywhere, even wide open throttle. And I had a couple of pretty good pulls. What was I going to mention before? When you're looking at these logs, you know, if you want to see really where you're spending the most of your time, you can hit counts and see how many counts you set. And this was an average run around town. A couple of stoplights, cruising at 40, 50, 60 miles an hour. And if you look at the cell hits or the cell counts, you can see where you're spending your time. This is obviously idle and just off idle where I had most cell hits. And then as I'm coasting and cruising, I'm right around in here. So this pretty much is where you're spending around town driving, other than when you're on and off the throttle, you know, coasting at constant speed down the highway or doing 45, 50 miles an hour, and then sitting at a stoplight, you're going to be in this range right here. You know, you can see a nice smooth transitions down. Just use some common sense. And you can look at the base map and see where the, you know, where you think it's going to gradually fade down and kind of ballpark it. You're never going to hit down here. You know, you master wide open throttle, you shoot up here. And then what happens is it runs across. As you're sitting in idle, you start to come off the line or come off the stoplight, and you get on the throttle, it's coming up here. And then as you're in the throttle, it's going to be pinned up here, or it's going to be up in here. You're almost never going to see in here except on decel. And the only reason these register anything right now is because that's decel, but I just hadn't come back to closed throttle yet. You know, I very rarely go from 90% throttle to 0. You know, you kind of feather back as you're shifting up and you're starting to back off the throttle a little bit. So as I'm backing off the throttle from this big run, it's like, you know, it's starting to track these. Because what happens is, you know, it revs up and it runs up to however high you rev it, and then as you back off the throttle, it'll start dropping back in this direction and come back to here again. So that you're never going to see this over here, super high throttle and 7,000 RPM. I hope you never see that. That would be snapping the throttle closed at like 7,500 RPM, and then you might see here, but you'll still never see down here. So those are all just going to be cleaned up and make them look good on the graph. You want them nice and smooth. And this obviously is rough, needs to be cleaned up, and I'm going to go do that right now. But it obviously looks better than it did before. I still have a bit of a dip here, but nowhere near as bad as it was before. What I can do is pull up, if you can compare, and I'll go back to my last map, and it'll pull it up in the same transition. Look at that. And now look at this. And I'm not done tuning it. It's going to get smoother. But look at the difference in map pattern. Or in a VE pattern. Major difference. So I think I'm definitely moving in the right direction with flow rate. I'm still a little high. And some of my max numbers are still in the 160s, 150s. Obviously that's higher than it should be. So I may still go back and reduce those injector flow rates at low vacuum even more. Because this is not a vacuum referenced fuel pressure regulator. So, you know, on the vacuum reference regulators that are mounted up on the intake, as intake manifold vacuum drops, it increases the fuel pressure, because when you don't have vacuum on the exit tip of the injector, it's harder to push fuel out, if you will. Or you look at it this way, with vacuum applied at low RPM, when vacuum's the highest, remember this is pressure, not vacuum. So vacuum's down here, pressure's up here. So vacuum's, you know, high vacuum is down here, low vacuum is high pressure. So it's an inverse relationship between vacuum and manifold pressure. So when you're at low vacuum, you're at a high vacuum, you're sitting there at idle, or your decel, you've got a ton of vacuum on the exit tip of the injector, is actually going to help pull the fuel through it. So your flow rate goes up. So vacuum reference regulators will actually compensate and keep the fuel pressure steady. And this is a non-vacuum reference regulator. So I will have a ramped, and I'll show you that. Get out of here, you. I will have a ramped fuel pressure rate. Where are we? Fuel, general. So flow rate versus vacuum. So at a given manifold vacuum, not pressure, So this is actually the low end of the scale, and this is actually the high end of the scale. What happens is the injector flow changes depending on how much vacuum is applied, because the vacuum helps pull the fuel through the pintle of the injector. And that's where I started out before I modified it. And these are 42-pound injectors, so I should see a 42 somewhere in the middle of the range here, and then it'll go up as engine vacuum goes up and go down as vacuum goes down. But what I did was tweak those numbers down. And it looks like it did that. So I may still need to come down some. If I'm not happy with the way it runs when I'm done with this retune, I may end up just getting another set of injectors with reliable data and going from there. Because again, I question, these are Bosch injectors, but dubious source, you don't know what you're getting. Hey guys, I'm back. It's next day. It's getting warm already. It's a little later in the morning, but I think I might be able to get a run in, and I'll get ready to dump this tune in. You know, I was thinking about this, and I wanted to go back and clarify something. I went back and watched one of the videos I shot yesterday, and I wanted to explain something a little more clearly. And you know, this wasn't ever designed to be a tuning video. It was more just an update, and here's what I'm doing and why. But I want to make sure I'm clear on some stuff. And you know, if you don't know, that the relationship between manifold vacuum and manifold pressure really speak to the difference between the conditions inside the manifold relative to barometric pressure or atmospheric pressure, which at sea level on Earth is like 101 kPa, and we're just about at sea level here. I'm in Florida, and so if you look at vacuum and kPa, zero vacuum would be atmospheric pressure. And as you increase in engine vacuum, as the motor's drawing in more air than is allowed past the throttle body or the carburetor, vacuum goes up because you're creating a suction on it. And then that's how the injector flow rates work off vacuum, and some other tables as well. But VE works off manifold absolute pressure. So pressure is the raw pressure in the intake relative, not relative to barometric pressure, but the actual pressure in the manifold, the literal pressure. So 100 is atmospheric pressure. So that's why when you're at wide open throttle, you're at 100 unless you have a forced induction turbo or supercharger. Then you can go up from there, and I would need a 2-bar marrow. But single bar, meaning 1 atmosphere, one barometric pressure range, is 100. So that's why these two tables have a bit of an inverse relationship. As you go up in vacuum, you're reducing the pressure in the manifold from 100. So if I'm at wide open throttle, I'm at 0 vacuum, and I'm at atmospheric pressure in the intake. As you start to close the throttle and come back down and start building vacuum in the intake, the pressure gets lower as the vacuum gets higher. So they're inversely proportional. And what I was looking at in the VE table, when I compared it back, I mean, here's what a factory VE table looks like. It runs up pretty steeply and then flatlines off, and you get a little bit of climb towards the outside. And you can see that the factory VE table is not totally flat. I mean, it's got a peak and a range, and this is going to be right before peak power, or right at peak power, and then. But it's got a graduated incline to it, but not nearly as steep as mine. And the steepness, even with the adjustments I've done, still tells me that I have way too much injector flow rate up here. I need to get back down, and you'll notice this is in percentage. So that's my numbers in each cell of the VE table, is how much past volumetric efficiency I am, compared to the original, where it peaks just below, what, 92, 95? Yeah. 95 is the peak. So if I'm going to come down from 160, well, I mean, it's going to be a little more efficient at higher RPM because of the bigger cam and some other work that's done, the intake and all that, but I still theoretically it shouldn't pass 100%. Because it's not forced induction. It's only going to draw what it displaces at max peak efficiency, and I'll never see peak efficiency. So really, what I probably need to do is cut down the higher end of the flow rate again to get these into a more manageable place. Cylinder efficiency on the factory setup at low at low throttle position, so highest vacuum is actually higher than mine in terms of volumetric efficiency. But at high load, high throttle positions, low vacuum, I'm telling it it's way more efficient than it surely actually is. So what I really need to do is, if I was going to take 162, 167 down to 100 or near that, I would probably have to take about 35% off the low end of this table, and then graduate that up, because I'm not too far off at the low end of the table. Low end of the table is pretty normal as far as a raw number being at efficiency at high vacuum. So that's pretty well ballparked. But the low end of the table really needs to be adjusted. And if I'm going to go through retuning this with new IFR tables, I really would not want to go through the whole process and keep tweaking it and redo it and tweak it and redo it. So what I think I'm going to do is take some meat off the low end, and I might come down here and reduce my lowest vacuum point, which is at some atmospheric pressure. I'm going to reduce that by 30%, and then I'm going to interpolate that up to about 70 kPa. And 70 kPa vacuum is going to relate to 30 kPa on the VE table in pressure. So I'd say, yeah, probably 30, 35. So I probably can reduce all of this injector flow rate going up. And ultimately, my highest numbers, my 167, needs to come down to closer to 100. I don't want to go all the way down to 15, because again, as far as in terms of volumetric efficiency, down at real high vacuum positions, I'm not far off of where I think it should be, which is 30s, 40s, 50s. That's fine. But what I need to do is flatten this gradient out by an increasing percentage as I go up here. So I'm gonna do this, and then of course I'll have to run through another couple of VE runs to get it sorted. And what we're going to see after my log is that I'm going to be way rich at low vacuum high on the table, and I'm going to be pretty much unchanged down low. So we're going to reduce my lowest vacuum point, which is wide open throttle, by, let's say, 30%. Let's see what that looks like. That takes me down to 27. So you can see what happened. I dropped my zero all the way down by 30%, but I haven't changed any of these numbers yet. So when I interpolate, and I'm going to interpolate the whole thing up. So we got a nice linear line. And we'll go out for a run. We'll see how bad it's going to be rich at the top end, and I'm sure it's going to be way rich, which is okay. That's safer than being way lean. And we'll see what that looks like. And if I can I'll bulk chop this down and fade it. I mean, theoretically I could do the same thing. I could start at 100 and drag it down to, what did I run up to, 80? So that'll be up to 20. Oh yeah, so I'd have to go to 100 and reduce that by 30%, and then interpolate down to 20, which should relate directly to what I did to the IFR table. So I'll tell you what, why don't we do that and see what happens. And I'm going to start at 105, because if anything, I'd rather take too little fuel out than too much. Oh yeah, so 105, I'm going to start at my highest point. I'm going to multiply that by 0.7. And you can see what that did to the graph. And then we're going to interpolate up to, let me keep this a little rich down here. I can go back and tweak that, so I'm not overly concerned about that, instead of going all the way to 20. I don't want to make it too lean. That's how you get into trouble. Yeah, we'll go there. And then this should bring all of those down based on kPa. And you can see, thanks to the interpolation, that's a perfectly linear line. That's not going to be accurate. Once I get this out on the road and run it for a little bit, then we'll see what's going on. Now, I'm not concerned about these numbers at the peak being over 100 and 100% efficiency. Is it perfectly correct based on cylinder efficiency? No. Does it have to be? No. It's got to be in the ballpark. What I want to get away from is having this VE number being so far out of whack, affecting the cylinder air mass calculations that go into the timing table. And I'm gonna dump this tune in, take it out for a log, and I'll come back once the log is up, and we can take a look and see what happened. All right, so just a quick run around the block, and here's kind of what I expected. Obviously, we're showing way lean down the mid-range, but as you can see, as we got up into open throttle, the lean started to flatten out. And the reason I expected this was because if you look at those fuel curves, look at the VE curves from with the original comparison. Let me get the graph out. It was relatively flat here. And when I interpolated between this point and this point, obviously it flattened this hump down right here. So I expected to have to go back in and bring that hump up, because it should ramp up and then almost flatline and then steadily grow as load goes on. And here with the interpolation, so this should probably be up here. You know, our peak is about where it should be. It's getting really close to it, but this graph should come out here and then come down. So I was expecting to see a big lean in the middle, and I don't want to drive around on that for long. Although I did look when I pulled back in, and I've still got no knock, so we're not getting into such a lean condition that it's leaning out and knocking, which tells me I have a lot more overhead and timing to put in too, most likely. Because if I can run 23% lean, 24% lean down here, although this is mostly decel, but here on acceleration, if I'm running 20% lean and I'm still not knocking, there's probably 2, 3, 4 more degrees to be had in there, and that makes power. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go in and drop this whole swath. I'm going to add about till, let's say, under 3,200 RPM. So I could just copy this whole table over and then just fill in the blanks. I might just do that. Now, one thing I want to do, take a look, is make sure I was up to engine operating temperature. So we're doing, if you look at this button right here, this is the whole data for the entire log. And this would be just for the narrowed section as I pulled in, which is, obviously, you can see it on the bottom. It's a very small piece of that run. So let me zoom out some. And that's a little too much. And where was I at operating temperature? I was still at 170 degrees. 80, 192, 198. So that's good. That's a good solid. Engine's good and warmed up. And my slider starts at about there. So, and I can go in, I can put a filter in to filter out only above, 185 degrees or 75 degrees, whatever I want, to filter the data out. But it's just as easy to use the log to do that. So I'm going to go ahead and use the back half of the log. And you can see where the bulk of that lean is. It's pretty much the same. I'm going to grab this, and it really isn't going to change these very much at all. These are just barely off. And I'm going to copy the whole graph, take that over to VCM editor. And I'm going to paste special as a percentage, and that'll add back that fuel in the middle, and watch the chart. Bam. Now, obviously, that's crazy mountain ranges. We don't want that. But now we're getting closer to the shape we wanted, a little higher and then a more of a taper back. And as I log this and get up higher in RPM, I'm going to bet this probably flattens out some too. So now I'm just going to fill in the blanks. And we'll take a look. We can see what's been changed here. And so we're going to go ahead and add 10% fuel, so 1.1. And I'm going to pick these singles here, and it'll bring some of the dips out. Come on now. At least this will this will put me in a safer spot to be driving around and getting a more effective run. How much are we off down there? Yeah, we're still, it's actually climbing up as we go on RPM until about here, up till about 2800. So I'm going to bring this box up here as well. These are only lean by, right now these are corrected, but these are only lean by 4 or 5%. So down here I'm going to guess, because we're going 10, 8, 6, 4, 3, 2, something like that. So I may take 3%, add 3% more fuel in across this little range, and then I'll go back and I'm going to add some more in here, and I'll add some more in here. And that was 1200, 600. I just want to add 3% here, so I'm going to make that times 1.03. I'll bring those up. I'll bring that up. That. And we can smooth a lot of this over too, so I'm going to smooth down from, say, 4800 RPM all the way down. I need to add some more in here. You can see that smooth that way out. Oop, 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 didn't want to grab that. If you happen to do that by accident, you accidentally, you're trying to spin the graph and you hit the wrong button, you put a fake peak in there, you can hit the back button and it'll drop that peak back out. Actually use the right button to scroll it around. I'm going to smooth that out a little bit more too. And obviously I didn't get anything up here, or those aren't up high enough, so we're at 2024. Yeah, well, I can see where the numbers drop off. Let's say 1600 up to 1600 up to 3200. Those first couple of charts, the first couple of cells. So here it goes 87, 88, 86. I'm going to start there. 95, then it drops back down, 94, and it starts climbing up again. So those obviously weren't modified yet, but I think I have a pretty good idea of where they're going to be. So I'm going to give those just a couple of points up. Let's see what 5% looks like. Yeah, so that brought it up in the range. And again, as we go through the log process, these will all smooth out, and of course I'll keep smoothing it. But now I feel safer about running this thing a little harder and a little longer run when not running so lean down through the middle, because it was really lean down there. That's pretty good. Where are those cells I'm seeing right there? No, they're right in the field. They're untouched. They were just about unchanged. But notice something else. Look at the shape. You see again that peak and valley are disappearing. Bring those two up a little more. That's still a drop. That's a little too much. We'll go 3%. That's a little better. Next pair got to come up too, it looks like. There we go. And we'll start getting this sucker smoothed out. And let's see where it's at. We're still dropping off here, but we'll see. We've got time to run this. I'm going to smooth these out a little more. There's a lot of peaks and valleys running up here, so between, we'll be looking at 1600 RPM and 1628 down to about 40 map, 40 kPa. So 1628 down to 40 map. And I'm going to smooth these downward along to try and smooth out some of those peaks and valleys. Actually, I'm going to smooth the whole thing. That way it'll take out some of the side to side also between those two. Yeah, it kind of levels them off a little bit. So now we're starting to see this middle's coming up. We're raising this hump up, and that's what it should be happening. And by all means, this is not the last time I'm going to do this. I've probably got a half a dozen or a dozen runs ahead of me just to get the VA table close to it, so it's within a 1 or 2% in the cells, and then I'll go over to math. But let me, I'm going to dump this in and take it out for another log, and I'll touch back in a few minutes. Hey, before I go, let me, one thing I want to do is make sure I save this. As you can see, I can put a note in here, a cut VE table 30%. I'm going to trim that down, and this is now going to be new tune 3. And I can compare this to the last tune and see what the difference is between, so the tune 2 with the cut VE 30% was the tune I just logged on. And here's the difference between the two. So you can see where I brought the fuel way up here relative. So the difference is scaled, so it's less and less of a difference as I get to the top. And you can see that reflected here. There's not much difference on the bottom. Brought it back up 3.8, 9.3, but down here I'm up 12%, 10%, 12.5, 13%. So it's a bigger difference in the meat and potatoes where I took that run out. So, all right, so back. I'm gonna go dump this tune in and take it out for a run, and I'll come back in a little bit. All right, so took it out for a quick run. It's getting crazy hot here already, so it was a brief run, but enough to see whether I was moving in the right direction and start getting the center cleaned up, so I can start making some decent long-term runs and some more heavier throttle runs. I did have a couple of decent throttle pulls down in this range that's real lean here. You can see I actually had downshifted into third and was getting on and off the throttle from closed throttle and up, and obviously it's still pretty lean right down the bottom, which is kind of what I expected, because again, I wanted to have that transitional, I was expecting to see this transitional hump down here, so kind of like we have in this row, but we don't have in the other rows yet, so I was expecting that. So let's go, I'm going to copy this over, and since we're so far out, especially down here, I think I'm going to copy this over as a straight percentage and not go by halves yet, and then I'll what I'll do is for the subsequent runs, I think I will do start copying at a half percentage as I get more coverage too. But right now I want to try and get this closer to inline as quickly as I can to just minimize how many runs I have to go out on. So I'm going to paste special and multiply represent, and you can see it. We got a little more up here, we got a little down there, and if I do, let me first save this since I just changed it. This should be number 4, I think. Tune 3. And I can compare, and you actually don't have to save it first, you can just compare it back to the same tune. So now we can look and see how much of a difference. So obviously we came a little richer in some spots because it was still lean, and then we're still leaning out in some spots. So now I'm going to go through and I'll manually fill in some of the blanks, and like this crease right here, I'm sure I missed. And where am I at? That's at 2800 RPM, down low. Yeah, so obviously we didn't get to 2800 RPM yet. So I'll richen this up preemptively to bring it in line with the others. And a lot of, some of this is easier to do. I'm doing this one-handed right now because I'm holding the darn camera with my hand, but what you can do is highlight a whole section. And I can either highlight this row and interpolate across, or just smooth it, however you want to go with it. And obviously this goes from 46 to 47.9 to 63. So obviously there's a hole right there. And we're at 24 and 35. Where are we? Yeah, right there. So you can visually see the hole on the graph. So that obviously needs to come up. And so I'm going to go through and smooth all these over again. The only thing bad about smoothing is that, you know, some of these points are going to be correct. And when you smooth it, if I smooth from here to here, it's going to raise the lows and lower the highs. And so some of the highs are accurate, so you chase your tail a bit. So I try not to smooth too much, and if I do smooth, I only smooth, you know, once or maybe twice if it's crazy. And but I'll do some manual first to fill in some of these big dips, because this big dip is going to suck down everything around it as it tries to smooth it. So any of these big holes and obvious deficiencies, I'm going to go manually change, and then I'll smooth it at the end to take care of some of the imperfections in it. But let me get this smoothed over, and I'll show you what the finished product looks like, and we'll get another run in. All right, so 5 minutes of manual smoothing and a little bit of automatic smoothing, and here's what we got. And I can get this loaded in the ECM and start doing some serious tuning around. So I'll wait till an early morning when it's a bit cooler out. I can go out for, you know, a half an hour, 45 minutes, and get some good data in all these cells and start getting this filled out as much as you can. As you can see, I went through and enriched a lot of it. This shows up as red for the modified. If we look at the difference between the last graph and the new graph, you can see where I put most of the meat in. I did raise it quite a bit through all of this mid-range because it needed it. And then there's right around peak power here where we're starting to really come up on the cam. I haven't done any pulls over 4,500 RPM, so I may need more fuel in here. I'm willing to bet I am. But for now, this gets me in a safer spot so I can start getting on it a little more and see what it's got. Well, there's where it was. We get a side view, might give you a better idea of what's going on with the getting away from the linear graph and going to more of a hump. And you can see it's starting to raise up. And similar to the OEM VE table, we're getting this ramp here, and then it starts to lay over and go up. And as I fine tune this, I'm guaranteed going to need some more fuel in here too. So that's going to bring that hump back to more where I think it should be. And we're still maxing out at about 115% VE, which is close enough for horseshoes and hand grenades. Something else notable, let me go save this guy. Have I already renamed it? Yeah, it's in 4. Let me save my changes. Something else notable is that, of course, whenever I'm doing a log, especially if mixture is going to be way off, I'm always keeping an eye on knock retard. And I did have a bit of knock. And again, this is where I had shifted down into third. So I was getting in a decent amount of load right here, coming in and out of the throttle. And this was my shifting down in the third at higher RPM, you know, higher than it would be if it was in fourth and overdrive and TCC lockup, and getting on a throttle. And so I'm getting about 2 degrees knock retard down here, which is 2,400 RPM. If you look on the graph, I was way lean in here. So this is going to be lean knock for sure. When I take this out on the next run, that's a little more duration. Again, I'll be watching this to see if I get any more. 2 degrees still isn't awful, don't get me wrong. And you see 6, 7, 8 degrees retard, you got a problem. A degree or two to, you know, what the ECM does is sees knock and it starts backing the timing out. And when the knock goes away, you know, it tells you how much timing it had to take out to make the knock go away. So if it's only pulling 2 degrees out, then the timing table's still darn close there. I may still need some more timing down here because I'm not seeing anything. So, you know, without getting on a dyno, you can't really tune timing without the dyno to see where your gains in horsepower are falling off on the horsepower and torque output. But what I'll do is I'll keep bumping the timing up until I start seeing knock, and then back it down 3 degrees from wherever I saw knock. You know, if I see when I start cranking the timing up at the end of this tuning cycle, and if I'm seeing 2 degrees retard up here, I'll probably take 5 out to give me like a 3 degree window. And this was also pretty warm too. We had got a good operating temperature up. We're about 200 degrees. At one point I saw 207. So we were getting pretty good temp going up. And this is about right. We're sitting about 201 through most of this tuning log. Cooled down a little bit up to 201, 203, and then that's right. And I pulled up in the garage and it was 205, 207 as it was climbing up. Without the secondary fan on. The secondary fan comes on at, I think, 205. So it'll hit 205, 207, and then it'll back down to like 201. And again, like I said, it's you know, it's 90-something degrees outside. I'm sure it's hotter in the garage. And I'm out there beating on this thing and putting around town and trying to run the air conditioning. And, you know, AC has a minor effect on fueling. You know, the ECM will account for it, but I'm not overly concerned with it right now. What I'm looking for is to get some averages and get in the ballpark. And as I start going back and doing more fine-tuning VE logs, which probably be at least another 2 or 3 or 4, I'll run without the AC on, and then I'll run with the AC on and see what kind of a difference it made and decide if I need to change my compensation tables for having the air conditioning on. They'll see how the air conditioning affects, whether I have too much compensation in terms of airflow or too little, because ECM will take all that in. It'll calculate how much torque the AC compressor is using up and compensate for everything else. So that's dotting I's and crossing T's at the very end. But timing-wise, we're still pretty close. I'm not worried about this. Like I said, it was real lean right there, 2,400 RPM, so I'm not surprised at all. Once this comes up, I'll keep an eye on that. And now that I've got fueling back down there, and we'll see if we start hitting spark retard again in here. I doubt we will. And that's it. I'll touch base with you next cool morning. I can get out and do another run. Thanks for tuning in. Like and subscribe. Bye. All right, so real quick, this is the log from the 5th tune in, which actually is more like the 4th tune, because the first one had a small change in IFR, and I went back in for the 2nd tune, and I adjusted the IFR way down at the high end to try and bring my VE numbers back into balance and get the IFR numbers closer to where I think they actually are. But as you can see, the variation, and this is about a 20-minute log. The variance between cells is getting much smaller. I'm getting a little bit lean up here as I break over 5,200 RPM, about 3%. Now remember, you've got trims running the whole time you're actually driving, so they'll compensate for a lot of this. And then, of course, I haven't done the MAF tune yet. Once you get above 4,000 RPM, the ECM is going to mix the MAF in increasing percentage for its fueling at higher RPM. So really, once you get above 4, the VE is just kind of like a ballpark, and then the MAF is going to start more and more accurately fine-tuning the mixture as you're up on high RPM. So I'm not overly concerned about running 6,500 RPM pulls to get the VE tight up here, because it's not going to be really looking at it as long as they're ballparked. And what I've done on the VE table is I've taken the numbers from like 5,800 or 5,600 up, and they're pretty much flattened out, because the MAF's going to take over from anywhere above 4,000. 4,000, it mixes in a small percentage of MAF with the VE reference, and then as you go up in RPM, it's going to be, let's say it's 10% MAF and 90% VE here, then it's 20% 80, 30% 70. As you go up in RPM, it's going to bias more heavily towards the MAF sensor. So that's why we're not overly concerned with getting this, with running dyno pulls up to 6,500, 6,800 RPM, and getting the VA table tight up here. And again, you'll never see this. This is all decel. This is what happens when you slap the throttle shut after a pull. Is you'll populate these, and they're going to be way lean, which they should be. And then, of course, DFCO, deceleration fuel cutoff, is disabled right now, so you're not seeing any of that yet. That's going to cut fuel pretty much on hard decel. So, I wouldn't be worried about this being too lean in here, because you're not going to be under throttle in these areas. Again, what we're primarily looking at is, this is driving around town. This is idle, obviously. Let me get the last cell. So this is idle, obviously sitting around. So I took a little bit of fuel out here, add a little bit up here. But if you look at the variance, it's not much. We're talking about, this cell way down here, closed throttle, idle, real low idle, and a little bit rich. So I did take like 3% off of both of these. And then here, 12 and 1600 RPM, you're idling down here. And then as you throttle in and it starts to transition, it'll lean out as you're opening the throttle. So this is fairly expected. So I bumped the fueling up a little bit in here, just so I don't get as much of a lean condition under tip in. Although driving it, you don't feel that at all. So really, this is just the wideband and the ECM catching up with throttle position right here. And then I added a little bit of fuel in here. And then I balance it out a little bit. But you can see the vast majority of these variances are really small. Your trims get more than capable of compensating for that. And what you don't want is cell to cell as it's transitioning through the cells and you're accelerating or decelerating. What you don't want to see are big transitions. Going from 7% rich. And let's say this one was like a -7, like a 14% swing, because it's what's going to happen is the long-term trims obviously take a longer term to adjust, and you'll have the short-term swim only has a certain range short-term trim rather, only has a certain range of motion. It can only go 25% plus or minus. So if you were to have like, 10, 15, 20% variances cell to cell, that short-term trim is going to be swinging all over the place, and you could run out of short-term trim movement, and you'd end up with an overly lean or rich condition because the long-term has swung it the other way. If your long-term trim is at 20% positive, because the cell is really lean, and you go to the next cell and it's really and it's a rich cell, the short-term trim only has 25% swing to compensate for that. So the long-term is still going to be at 20%, and then 19 and 18. It's going to gradually drop off because you're going lean, and the ECM won't be able to compensate enough with the short-term trim, which is your fast actor. So we're really almost done here. This was about a 15, 18, 20 minute run with a couple of wide open throttle pulls. Ended up to about, I don't know, 50, 600, $6,000, which is fine for VE table tuning, and for this motor, and I'm good. And some of these cells don't populate up here because of the filters I ran on the scan. So when it builds this histogram, it's going to take out anything that it feels that was within a transient. If there's too much motion, too fast of a motion on the map sensor or the mass airflow, and I'm not using mass airflow in the tuning right now, but I am using it. If you look at it, I do have mass airflow up here so I can track it and use that in the filtering to take out any transient. So big, heavy throttle changes, real rapid throttle changes. The ECM can't keep, ECM, was going to take a, 100th of a second to catch up, and the same thing with the wideband. So you want to filter out any of the real quick throttle changes. So I'm driving in relatively steady throttle positions, except the wide open throttle pull was pretty heavy, but still it was gradual enough that I tracked it all the way up to 5,200, 5,600 RPM. And that's it. We're really close. So I'm gonna load this. I've rewritten the VE tune, and you can see the new graph is getting exactly what we wanted, what we saw from the old kind of general shape, which is it comes out pretty gradually. You're at most fueling up here, and then it steps off pretty steeply as you get to the other end. And as you can see, my numbers are much closer now. I'm in 118, 117.6 is the highest. And so that's close enough, we're good. And you can see, obviously, I've done a lot of changes here to try and smooth this out. And then I've done some smoothing as well to try and filter it. I'm still a little interested in this step right here. It's a pretty sharp lip at 812, 1600 RPM. And so that's interesting. And I think, again, this is my lean tip-in. So I'm stepping on the throttle. You're coming out of a light under reasonable hard acceleration. You're up to 1600 RPM pretty quickly. So I think that's why it's my lean tip-in is making me want to put more into that ridge at 1600 RPM. But my big valley is gone, the big peak is gone. That obviously could be a little smoother, but I want to take this out for a good level run, a good long run. I'm going to go out for half an hour, 45 minutes, probably tomorrow morning. Take it for a big long cruise, so that way when I'm running the the scanner, I'm getting a lot of counts in these cells. I'm pretty good right now. Again, you can see this is where idle is. This is cruising down the road, 30, 40 miles an hour in 40, 45 miles an hour in overdrive, and then up at 55 or so for a while cruising. You can see where the bulk of the cell hits are happening, and this is where you're spending most of your time while you're driving, is right in here. And then acceleration, you start to see these. This was a little hard acceleration, so I got up at lower RPM. I was getting to lower maps. Lower to lower manifold vacuum readings because it was a little harder in the throttle, but it only happened once or twice, so I didn't set that many cell counts. And then as we're coming up, the vast majority of acceleration was happening through here. And then of course, in here as we're driving around town, coming up stoplight to stoplight, and then the wide open throttle pull where I punched it here and it dropped to 100 map, which is 0 vacuum, and then it shot up at wide open throttle the whole way up. And I think I did that twice, 2 or 3 times. So you can see we're getting decent cell counts. So really, this is tune number 6 going in. So this is only the 4th. I've done 4 VE logs, and this is the 4th new tune going in. I've got maybe one more in me because this is pretty clean right now. And I'm ready to go on to mass airflow. So I just want to get one good long drive in, like a 30, 40, 45 minute run in through a variety of parameters. I may take it up on the highway and get on it a bit, and just kind of get lots of cell counts in all these cells and see whether it's smoothed out enough or whether it needs any fine tuning, and then I'm ready to go to MAF. So really, if I had been doing this on a customer's vehicle where I was under a time constraint, then easily it's in a day or a half a day, at most. and then go back and do the MAF. The MAF's only going to be a couple of runs, and that's pretty easy. That's pretty quick to iron out. That's probably 2 or 3 runs and it's done. 2 or 3 logs. And then go over the timing table, see if I can find any more juice in it. And then I'm going to be done. So I'm going to run, I'll run 1 more log tomorrow and come back and look at it. And then we're ready to wrap this up. And Krista. Maggie, the shop dog, is just thoroughly exhausted from doing not a friggin' thing all day, except looking beautiful. And that's it. I got my ice water staying hydrated. And I'll talk to you tomorrow. I'll touch back when I get the second run in. All right, so just came back from a run, and I think we're pretty much done with the VE side of this retune with the new injector data. If you look at the log, I've got a couple spots that are a little lean. Those are in decel. I'm going to bump those a little bit. Any of the riches, really, we're only talking about 2 or 3%. And again, once you get below 4 or 5% variance, then you're good. I mean, you've got short and long-term trims that are going to run and compensate for any, transient leans and riches that happen with engine temperature and air temp variations and fuel octane variations and all that stuff. So, we're getting really close in here. So I may touch just 1 or 2 of these, bring this down 1% maybe. You don't want to go, well, I don't want to take this down, full 3%, 2%, because, it could just be happening to spike a little bit high. But I'm getting pretty consistent. I've got good counts in these cells. Most of them are over 100 or close to 100. I've got good cell hits, 25, 66, 73. See, like there was a 7 right there. And that disappears out of my graph here. So I wouldn't trust data with only 7 hits on it, but I get up 20, 30, 40, 50 hits per cell, and that's pretty reliable data for this particular place in time. So I'll tweak these a little bit, take a little bit of fuel out here because that's a little high at 8. Most of these are really close. It is starting to look a little bit lean at top. Like I see it increasing. Like here's a little rich, a little less rich, a little bit lean, a little leaner. So I'm going to bump this up here a little bit as well. Now, once you get up on higher RPM, again, I'm running mass airflow and speed, a mass airflow tune that includes the mass airflow and the VE table. So it's going to run off dynamic fueling, which means it's going to use the mass airflow increasingly more as the RPM goes up. Because up here, it's much more stable. You're not seeing so many jumps between cells as you are at low RPM and acceleration. When you're in wide open throttle up here, the engine spinning RPM so quickly, these cells start to merge together. So it relies more on the mass airflow for fueling adjustments. So that's where it's going to be more critical, and that's called dynamic air. And this was never designed to be a how-to video, just kind of like a ride along, but there's some stuff that some little pearls I want to share with you. So I'll mix these a little bit, and if I've already gone up and changed the tune and updated it, and as you can see the difference between the last tune I had with the old injector data and the new tune now, as far as the VE table goes. Now here's my new table, and here's the old table from before I did the injector data. And you can see what a dramatic change. So obviously I'm really close on the injector data now. I'm very happy with that. Something occurred to me, and I had an epiphany, is that I still have a bit of a spike here at 1600 RPM and a little bit of a flat spot, and it goes up. And it finally occurred to me what the spike was at 1600. That's the torque converter stall. This is a stock converter trans, and the stall is 16, or is rated at 1650 stall for this converter. So there it is. So you're getting on the throttle and it's accelerating, and then it loads down as the torque converter reaches stall and starts to push. And of course that's going to change your fueling. It changes the load on the engine. So once I update the stall, once I change the converters and update my stall up to like 2600 RPM stall, that's going to push me up here, which is would be a much flatter ramp. So that's what that is right there. That's why it's at 1600, because the stall speed on this converter is 1600. So that's got to be it. So, obviously once I do the torque converter, I'll have to come back and touch this up, but it'll be a much easier to update. If I bring up the last tune, the one I went out with this morning, which would be tune 7. So that's only 6 logs and 6 adjustments, and I'm done with the VE tune update. So here's where it's changed from, and you can see I haven't changed a whole lot. I bumped up the fueling up top in case it's starting to lean out. Because again, up here, you know, we're going to be running mostly off the mass airflow sensor. Anything above 4 grand, it mixes in mass airflow data and progressively more mass airflow as you get in higher RPM. So really, all I want is a decent base underneath the mass airflow. In other words, you couldn't leave these zeroed out because it's still going to reference it to some extent. So I want it to be close, but it's going to rely more on the mass airflow data. So this is all pretty much flat up here, and that's why it's flat up here, because you're relying off mass airflow for subtle changes or for increasing fueling changes. And then you can see I bumped it a little bit, changed it a little here. What did we do? So I leaned it a little through here where it was a little fat. I richened it a little here where those drop-offs were. This is the riching up here, and then a little bit of leaning in here just to get these idle fueling cells a little closer where they should be. And these are transient, these are tip-ins, so I'm not too worried about that. So here we go. And keep in mind also, you know, when this is running, you're running, when you're driving this down the street, when you're all finished, you're running short-term and long-term fuel trims. The long-term fuel trims have a map similar to the VE table that holds the last long-term trim data for that particular cell. So as the computer learns how it wants to run, it's going to adjust and hold long-term trim. So it's going to adjust, it's going to have its own modifier table that modifies this. So, you know, I'm not going to go crazy, and there's no point in going crazy trying to get every last little cell perfect, because that's constantly going to change, and the ECM has more than enough capability to compensate for 1.4, 1.7% lean. It'll just, long-term trim cell will set 1.4 rich. And so that'll balance out. And the short-term trims will be back at 0. And then they can float back and forth by 25% to change the mixture as you're driving, depending on your octane rating and engine temp and intake air temp and all that stuff. So yeah, I mean, this is well close enough. 3%, 1.3, 0.5, 0.2. This is really close. So that's good. So really, I'm ready to go. So I've updated the VE table, so I'm confident that what I've put in here, and it's nice and smooth, is ready to go as a good solid VE table. So what I need to do right now is transfer it back so that I can go to run the mass airflow sensor. And what I want to do is have it not use dynamic air, I want it to use dynamic air because I want it to read the mass airflow sensor, but I want it to read it from a low RPM so that I can scale the mass airflow. Dynamic air is on this table under airflow and dynamic, and what you see now is got high RPM disable, so it's not going to scan, it's not going to run or reference the mass airflow sensor below 4,000 RPM. So what you want to do is go in and change that to, you know, idle basically, or anything below idle. So at 100 RPM and up, it's going to start referencing the mass airflow sensor and use that for fueling, and I'll be able to use my wideband to determine whether the mass airflow needs to be changed, whether mass airflow data needs to be changed. And that's going to be mass airflow, airflow versus frequency. And as you can see, this is a single chart, a single line. So this is much easier to tune. So it'll take, I don't know, 2, 3, 4 runs, and this thing should be tight. Now I'm expecting this to have to come way down because my VE table is my injector data is now reduced up here as well. So I'm expecting this to flatline out, to come out here. But we'll see. We'll get this thing, we'll take it for a couple of runs. And as we go, and this is mass airflow frequency, not RPM, so make sure you realize. So as you go up in RPM, the frequency increases. And as the RPM climbs, it determines how much fueling it needs at a particular mass airflow sensor, mass airflow frequency. So, what we did was come in a dynamic and we dropped the high RPM disable down to 100 RPM, so it'll reference the mass airflow immediately. And it's also going to reference the VE, and that's why it's important to do the VE first. I've tried to do it the other way around, and you can't eliminate the VE table from it completely. It'll always reference it. So if your VE table is jacked up, you're just chasing your tail trying to do a mass airflow tune on it. So I swapped that over so it references the mass airflow at low RPM. Everything else is fine. You don't need to change. I still don't want. I still want it to be open loop, so it's going to be closed loop enabled. It's going to be up max, so it never goes into closed loop. Long-term trims are shut off. Short-term trims are disabled. Everything is set the same way it was to the VE table. The only other thing I want to do is go up into engine diag and notice the mass air frequency fail is at 100 hertz because I wanted to fail it. I wanted it to run strictly off the VE table. So what I want to reverse that back. So we can look. Let me go back to my last tune when it was on. And so it was originally 13,500 hertz. So that way the ECM knows if the master airflow is reading 13.5, it's gone bad. So I want to restore that. We'll go, oh, wait. 13.5. And then I'm going to go to my DTCs and I'm going to re-enable the check engine light for the mass airflow codes. And I'm going to change these back to fail on second error. That way if it has a fluke, it doesn't set a code and disable the MAF right off the bat. So that's back to factory settings. And that's it. So my mass airflow is now re-enabled. It's going to start using it for dynamic air from 100 RPM up. So it's going to be, it'll give me an accurate reading on the mass airflow. What else did I want to talk about? Oh, a little tidbit that I found out relatively recently is that, you know, as I'm going through these tunes and these logs, I like to keep an eye on my knock sensor, and if I'm getting into knock, and maybe I'll take a degree or two out of the table as long as it's not an overly rich situation. Let's see, I had no knock through this. Let me see if one of my prior logs. I think I had some knock on the last one. Yeah, so I had a little bit of knock in here. And what you can do is if you're charting knock, I've got it right here in a red line. I can spot it right there. So here's the cells. I'm right in the middle of where it was picking up knock. I go back to my VE scan, and it's not overly lean. A lot of times you'll see lean. If you're overly lean, it'll start to knock because it runs super lean and cylinder temps go up. So that's legitimate knock right in this range. So I went in and adjusted that, adjusted the timing back a couple degree, about a degree or degree and a half in most of this range to bring it down. And there you can see I brought it down in here, and I also did a little bit of smoothing to try and spread it out, and I gave myself a little timing in the mid-range here, just to kill two birds with one stone. And if I go into the mass airflow tune, the tune logs, and it shows overly lean and knock in the same spot, I'm going to adjust that mixture first, unless I'm getting significant knock, like 5-8 degrees. But if it's just a half a degree of knock, retard to get it back, because ECM is going to adjust the timing back if it picks up knock. So if it only has to move it by 0.8 or 1 degree, I'm not going to go back and adjust the timing table if I'm in a lean spot. Once I get the mixture, once I get the MAF more accurate, and there isn't a big lean area, and I'm still getting knock, then I'll go back and adjust the timing table. That's why timings usually last. And you'll never get the timing table nailed down perfectly unless you run on a dyno. The only way to really get timing perfect is to run on the dyno and keep bumping timing and see where the horsepower starts to fall off, where you're starting to get knock, and go from there. But I can get it close. I mean, I know this motor is going to want to run around 22, maybe 23 degrees. As you can see, I'm still shy of that. This ramp is going to be a bit different, so that's why I'm adding a little timing in here to see if I can get some more timing going in under load at part throttle before I get to wide open throttle out here. Something else to notice also, now that I've got the VE table adjusted, you'll notice the highest I'm getting as far as cylinder air mass, and this is what tipped me off to the problem to start with, is that when I ran earlier, let's go back to here with the old fuel, with the old injector scale. I don't know if that had any wide open throttle pulls in it. Here's a good one. So this had a wide open throttle pull in it, up to 5,500, 5,400 RPM, something like that. But as you can see, at wide open throttle, at high RPM, and I'm not even, so this is right about coming on the cam here, about 5 grand. It's making pretty close to peak horsepower up there, or getting real close to peak horsepower. I'm already maxing the cylinder air mass chart. Its calculated cylinder air mass is already at the top of the chart. So I'm going to run out a cylinder air mass chart, and obviously my injector data is way off. And this is what tipped me off. And like, man, I'm never going to get the timing right because I'm running out of table. So now that I've done the retune with the correct VE numbers, or much closer VE numbers, with a wide open throttle pull, I'm at 80. I'm nowhere near the top of the chart, which is perfect. That's where I want to be. And as I get up in RPM, and I had backed off the throttle, that's why it dropped down here at 5 grand. As I'm running these mass airflow tunes now, you're going to see this climb a little more, but I wouldn't expect to see it go any higher than, 0.88, something like that at a max. But so this gets me back in a good working range for the timing tables. Now, something to consider is that when you have the mass airflow sensor disabled doing the VE tune, which I did, the computer is automatically going to revert to the low octane table. So if you're doing, if you're making subtle timing changes because you're hitting a little too much knock during the course of tuning, and you're adjusting it on the high octane table, they're never going to have an effect because it's referencing, with the mass airflow sensor, it's referencing the low octane table. So it's important that every time you change the timing, you match these. So if you go in and you change the timing a little bit on this high octane table, take the whole table, copy it over to the low octane. That way when it references the low octane during the VE tune, it's going to show the same timing changes. Once you get all done with your timing tune and you're all done tuning it, you can take your high octane table, copy it to the low octane, and then go in and let's say take out 4 degrees, let's say across anywhere outside of idle. So here to here. Chop like 4 degrees out of it and use that as your low octane under load at RPM. So that way if you get a batch of bad gas or something and it starts picking up a lot of knock, when it picks up enough knock, it'll revert down to the low octane table because the computer is going to assume that you have low octane fuel, and you want it to be able to have some timing backed off without getting into riding on the knock sensor the whole time every time you touch the throttle. So make sure when you're doing any timing adjustments, any adjustments to your timing map, you're copying them to the correct table or copying them to both tables. So once you're done with the tune, then you can go in and you can knock the low octane down a few degrees to get yourself some headroom in case you actually do get bad gas. And that's it. So I'm going to load this in with the mass airflow sensor active and take it out on the mass airflow calibration run. I'm sure it's going to run like dog shit. Let me save my tune. It's going to run like poop, I'm sure, because the mass airflow is still scaled to the old. Mass airflow is still scaled to the old injector flow rate. So like I said, I'm sure this will flatten out some. And what you'll see on a stock, let me compare to the stock one. That'll be a good reference. If I go back to the original calibration on this mass airflow sensor. So this was the manufacturer's original calibration for this mass airflow sensor. So how much air volume it's flowing for frequency. So as you can see, that's the original. And then that's the last tune with the bad injector data. So you can see how much it ramped it up trying to add more and more fuel because the injectors weren't flowing as much. I'm not going to bother pumping this up right now. I'll bring this down. If I get out on the first run and it looks like I'm down much closer to the original calibration, I may just copy the original calibration over and run from there. But let's get it out on the road and see what it does. Oh yeah, and I should note that I'm accompanied by the Tiger Dog. Hello, Maggie girl. She's keeping me company here, giving me tuning advice. She's taking a break apparently from sleeping like she worked a double shift at the Fritos factory. Oh. Yeah, I know. This couch's not big enough. We need a bigger one for you. All right, go girl.